COVID-19 recovery, helping Hoosiers recover financially, physically, mentally, and socially through services provided by Community Action of Greater Indianapolis. Services include energy assistance, child care, family support, education, training programs, and food assistance. COVID-19 recovery.
Hi, I'm Kelly Vaughn, and welcome to COVID-19 Recovery.
And I'm Al Bracken with Community Action, Kelly's co-host today.
All right, and we're here today. We've got a really interesting show, one that we hope will answer some questions we have about suicide and suicide prevention, and also offer some hope for perhaps someone who's out there watching right now who is contemplating that. We're here to inform you and to keep you safe. And joining us now on COVID-19 recovery is Grant Anderson. And Grant, you are clinical supervisor at Crosswinds Counseling here in Indianapolis, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, welcome to the show. I'm going to jump right into this issue of suicide. And there was a beauty queen by the name of Chesley Christ who jumped from a high rise in New York several weeks ago. And that just really, I think it just blew the minds of the entire nation of how someone so young and beautiful and outgoing. I mean, she was Miss USA. She had her whole life ahead of her. She's, everything we've always wanted, or most people dream of a life like hers. And she jumped. Help us to understand. And when you heard that story, did you understand, being, a clinical supervisor, did you know what that was all about?
Yeah, so there's pieces there that I think are really important, that are significant to talk about. And one is, she had mentioned mental health before, and she was getting help before, but she'd been doing better. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to have been seeking help, have been utilizing coping skills, supports in their life, and then regress and fall back. And what happens often is, there's that feeling of emptiness. There's a hopelessness that comes, that it's not connected to accomplishments. It's not connected to how on top of life I may feel or others may see me at. It's really an internal processing, which tells them that there's no way out, that it's always going to feel this painful. I'm always going to feel this empty inside. And when that happens, people start looking towards, what's my answer? What's my out? And suicide becomes more prevalent in their mind. They start thinking about it more often because it seems like a way to stop the pain or to stop the feelings of emptiness that continue to encroach in their life.
When you say the pain, in her case, and I know you mentioned it a little bit there, but what was she feeling, and is the pain real, or is it part of the sickness? And I don't know if that's the proper word or not, but
I want to be a little careful speaking to her specific pain without ever being her therapist or ever seeing, her situation one-on-one. I can't speak to that too closely, but it does feel like it can feel like a very physical pain. Sometimes our emotional turmoil inside of us can manifest in what we call somatic symptoms. So sometimes that can feel like constant stomach aches or aches in the body, or even headaches. They can come and go. But what people tend to often describe is that emotional piece that just kind of wells up, and it makes them a lack of motivation, a lack of wanting to do anything. They pull back from things they used to do. So if she was doing the things that were helpful for her, engaging in social situations or engaging with friends, taking on coping skills, sometimes we pull back from that because of the emotional pain inside of us.
Grant, there's again, thanks for coming on this morning. There's a series of commercials out there that I've been noticing in reference to the approach for individuals, the approach for seeking mental health counseling. And in this particular commercial, and I think we all can identify with it, the individual's friends are just telling them to think of anecdotal ways of getting over depression or mental health issues, of just like think how bad it could be. Think of, just normal ways of that a person would think about approaching mental health, but they don't understand the clinical side of mental health and how you just can't think your way out of it. Can you address that a little bit and talk about your practice at Crosswinds and give us a little insight to how you guys, what your approach is at Crosswinds also?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if this is kind of where you're heading with those anecdotal pieces, but there's a kind of a growing trend called toxic positivity. And it's kind of that mentality of just telling people, well, you at least you have food on your table, or it could be worse, or,
right.
You look at all the positive things in your life. Don't look at the negative things. And what that tells the person is you don't have the right to feel what you're feeling. You shouldn't feel sad if you're feeling sad. You should feel happy. So they're basically telling someone, just change your feelings. And what happens is in that anecdotal response, people don't feel the freedom. They're not feeling safe emotionally. They don't feel like they have the skills to just take themselves out of it, because it doesn't work that simply. If it did, we wouldn't see the rates of suicide that we're seeing. So with mental health approach, we really get to know them. There's a relationship that's built on trust. And we really try to provide them a perspective shift or a way of looking at the situation that's different. We bring in supports, we bring in safety measures to help them if they are talking about suicide or thinking about suicide. And we really are focusing on, if you're feeling that emotional turmoil, what are ways that we can choose to have a different approach? Rather than just thinking yourself out of it, it's coping skills, support systems, healthy people coming alongside of you, doing healthy things for your life.
Yeah. Can you reflect or tell us a little bit about what you guys are seeing or what your practice is seeing through COVID? Any specific trends with certain demographics or anything that you're seeing above the norm, if you will?
Sure. I think that across mental health fields, and specifically for sure true with Crosswinds counseling, just an uptick of people coming in and looking for help. People are seeking out help in numbers we haven't seen before, specifically with adjustment issues, because they're struggling to adjust with, how do I adjust to this new way of life? If COVID's going to be around, how do I live with that? How do I no longer go into an office? How do I start working from home? We're seeing a huge rise in anxiety as people have that tension and that stress that they don't know how to process. The other thing is depression is going up as well. Part of that's the isolation, I think, but part of that is just with COVID and our response and how the world looks now. We're seeing a lot more mood disorders coming in.
How about social media? What kind of impact when you talk about social media, COVID, isolation? Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing as far as the effect of social media is having on the individuals?
Sure. So, there can be some benefits, obviously, to having those social connections through the technology we have, whether it's reaching out or keeping up with family or connecting with others. But what I'm seeing, or what we tend to see, is a growing trend of the Instagram filter. I need to put a face on to show the world that my life looks like this. And when people go on and they start seeing all these, quote unquote, made up pictures that aren't necessarily accurate to what real life looks like, that they get a mentality and a perspective of, this is what my life should be, and it's not. And when they start to compare themselves, they can very easily shift into feeling, I don't have it all made. I'm never going to meet up to the standards of what the world has for me. I feel empty now. And they start going down that path that can lead towards more depressive symptoms.
I've got a question related to social media. Now that you brought that up, Val, what I find interesting sometimes is what's happening when people on social media are putting all of their business out there, and especially when it comes to medical information. And I can see something basic, oh, I had a headache, but I mean, they'll include pictures of the injury or the cut, or they just got out of surgery, or photos of them in the hospital. And considering, we have HIPAA laws that, protect all the information for a reason, is it just me?
In the sense of that growing trend?
Yeah, like what makes someone do that to be so public about something that is typically so private?
Yeah, I think it comes from a desire to have significance in their life. They want to be seen. They want to get that feedback. We're in a world now where it's all about the likes. It's all about, are people seeing me? Do I have enough views? And so, putting those things out there, like, this is my medical injury, this is what's going on in my life. And I'm also trying to incite people to kind of bring them into your world. It's really a longing for significance. It's a longing for, this is who I am. I get my value from the technological world who's coming around and looking at my pages or my social media.
Yeah, because some of that can be risky, especially if you got a lot going on and then you want to apply for a job, and then who's looking at that information may say, well, that person's kind of sickly, and they're not, they don't have to disclose that they made a decision based on something you posted on social media. So, not to mention, I don't know, there's probably other things that we don't think about that somebody would be looking at that and could make a decision about our lives. So I was just curious as to where that was coming from.
Yeah, and we don't always get the context when we see those things. The example is, you could easily be portraying that your life is going great, you have all these accomplishments, but inside, and what's just commonly what we're seeing, that you see those depressive things coming out, those symptoms of turmoil, emotional distress, all behind the scenes, but you're not posting that because you don't want the world to see. You want to, push this perfect picture of who you are. It may not always be real.
We're going to need to take a break.
Okay.
And I did want to put out there, someone out there, if you are depressed, if you have been contemplating suicide, there's information on the screen. Please call and get help. That's what we're here for. That's what this show is about. And so we want you to be safe. So if you need help, please contact the information on the screen. And we're going to take a break. We'll come back and we'll finish our conversation with Grant Anderson after this.
During the COVID-19 emergency, community action agencies are open and here to ensure the well-being of families across the country. For over 50 years, we've been delivering life-changing services, solutions, and stability.
Contact your local community action agency serving Boone, Hamilton, Hendricks, and Marion counties for help during the COVID-19 emergency. We can assist with masks, hand sanitizers, food, shelter, transportation, and more. Apply today.
And we're back here on COVID-19 recovery with Grant Anderson, who is clinical supervisor at Crosswinds Counseling. And again, Grant, we appreciate you coming on and sharing this information, which again is on the screen. If you're struggling, if you're contemplating suicide, contact the authorities and please get help. So Al, I know you had some questions that you were posing to Grant.
Yeah, I think just as we want to be aware of not only our own mental health, but our mental health and well-being and wellness, but we want to absolutely be aware of our loved ones, our coworkers, and we need to be aware of our surroundings anyway. So can you give us some indicators of some warning signs that intervention is needed? And I would just say that a lot of times intervention is just being open to talk to someone. And if, so sometimes it's just doing a wellness check on the phone and calling to check on someone. So can you give us some warning signs when we should be aware and some triage type things that we can do for our immediate loved ones?
Yeah, so there's obvious warning signs if someone's coming to you and telling them that they're feeling suicidal or they want to kill themselves. It's obviously a good time to encourage them to seek help or find those things for them. And like you kind of mentioned, Al, just kind of being that presence for them to kind of talk and share their emotions. There's a couple of others, obviously, that are less common risk factors. And I want to preface that not just seeing one of these risk factors doesn't mean this person's going to commit suicide. It's just one of those factors that can lead to a greater chance that they might lead down that road towards suicide. So previous suicide attempts is a huge factor we look for. If they are having a preoccupation with death or dying, sometimes we call this passive suicidal ideation. It's that, I'd just like to go to sleep and never wake up. It's not necessarily thinking of an active plan, but maybe just kind of that desires for death. If they're searching for a method, whether it's looking for weapons or pill or something other, how do you do it? Definitely a warning sign we want to be aware of. Recent losses in their life, which can be very real in what we're dealing with in the pandemic now. Anytime they start talking about hopelessness, they're pulling back from social relationships, there's a dramatic mood change. Sleep can be a big factor, whether it's depressive symptoms of sleeping way too much or not feeling like they can sleep at all, or signs to look for. Family history, something we also ask about. And then if there is substance use, an increase in substance use is often a big factor that we can look for, that suicide may be around the corner.
Go ahead.
You kind of asked, what can we do, or what what's a response when we hear that? You kind of mentioned just being that wellness and just being present. One of the common misnomers I think sometimes is asking someone if they're suicidal. Like, if we say the word suicide out loud, they're more likely to attempt suicide. So we want to be very careful we don't say that word, but we don't find that's actually very true. We find that, being able to be frank about, hey, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Have you ever thought about suicide? Is a great way to just kind of step into those conversations. People are more likely to talk to, obviously, those that they feel comfortable with. So sometimes we want to automatically send them on to professionals, or we want to send them on to an adult if we're talking about teenagers. But sometimes they're more likely to open up to a peer first. And so those peers are asking those questions of, what's going on? How are you feeling? Do you want to hurt yourself? And then persuading them to get help if they're hitting some of those risk factors. Kind of looking at the 1-800-273-TALK suicide prevention line, and other ways to kind of reach out and find ways to get help. It's very important at that point.
So help us to understand, and again, and I may have touched on this in the first half, but when a person thinks about committing suicide, is it a condition as a result of depression, or is it situational? Like some people, I have remembered times in my life where I didn't want to live, like when my father passed away. You feel the grief is so bad. It's like, how can something psychological affect me physically? But what I think about is when I was 5 and my mother, I was lying across her knee and she said, "You don't ever kill yourself." And see, that has stuck with me all my life. So no matter how bad it got, it was just like, that's not going to happen because mama said you don't do that. So are we talking about situations like that where life gets so bad, or is it that, again, as was the situation with Chesley Christ's, was it things can be fine and it's something going on internally? Or is it possible for both to happen in some way, shape, or form?
And I think, Kelly, that would be the answer I would give you. It's absolutely possible for both. We know that depression can obviously lead towards suicide, but that doesn't mean just because someone's depressed that they're also suicidal. So we don't want to make that conditional response. But situationally, one of the reasons that the risk factors of recent losses it can be a risk factor towards suicide is because when you lose someone, and that grief and that bereavement are so intense that sometimes we start thinking and looking that way. So it can be very situational. As we're going through this pandemic, and as we're seeing people are losing friends and family around them, it's very likely that their mind is becoming more focused on the loss, which can easily lead into perspective of, well, what's the point, where the hope can go down. That unless they've had some of those ingrained thoughts like you had, we don't kill ourselves, it can be an easy way out in their mind. And actually, that's where the statistics are showing us. I think the most recent we have right now is from the National Institute of Mental Health from 2019. And it shows that suicide was considered the 10th leading cause of death in the United States at that point. It was actually the second leading cause for ages 10 to 34. And then fourth leading cause for 35 to 44-year-olds. So it's on the rise, and it's continuing to be a big factor of how people are responding to pain and to situations and even to mental health. unfortunate.
You know, the commercials that Al was referring to earlier about, well, look up on the, look at the bright side of things. Now, those are things that I do say to myself. I don't know that I'm always thinking about, suicide, but I think about being, you're sad or depressed. And I will tell myself that, like, there's a lot of people who got it worse than you today. And it is a way to kind of, I do feel better. It's like, because I said, I really shouldn't complain because I am blessed, that kind of thing. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that definitely plays an impact. One of the things that we do when someone will come into counseling and they will say that they have having thoughts of suicide is we'll go over what we call a safety plan. We want to keep people safe. And so we'll assess whether or not is it to the point where we need to send them in to an ER to get assessed to see if they need to stay overnight. If they're not at that level, we'll continue to go down that road of safety planning, which is going to look at, what makes you happy? What are the coping skills that work? Is it going for a walk outside? Is it taking a bath? Is it calling a friend? Is it, journaling? Is it, listening to a favorite song? So those things that may just make us feel good can have an impact on our thoughts and our mental health at that time. But we'll also kind of help them identify places and people. We'll kind of do both sides. What's triggers you to want to feel sad? And then what makes you feel better when you're in those places, and help kind of identify where to go when they're in trouble, and how can they reach out in that plan form of what can I do, who can I talk to, where can I go?
One of the things that from I can just think as part of my background in Homeland Security is that saying that if you see something, say something. Mm-hmm. And I almost see this the same way. And even as a bridge to the positive affirmations that Kelly was talking about internally, it's also going back to situational awareness in your environment, the ones that you love and care about, to have the time to just stop and talk. Because you are absolutely right. I as a non-professional, I think that actually asking somebody are they suicidal is not the way to go. Is to let that determination be done by the professionals, while at the same time, I believe, and you can address this, there's a lot that can be done if you, in your heart, you really care and you really want to know how someone is doing, and you not only you're asking them, but the art of listening and affirming to them that you hear them and being serious about it. So again, and I know you see it all, but you are a licensed mental health professional. And we have to know the foot soldiers that are out here addressing and working with our family members and coworkers. We have to be able to have listening sessions, especially men. Especially, I'm going to be biased, especially African-American men, because I keep hearing that the suicide rate in our young African-American men is increasing, which is quite fascinating, and that the suicide rate among teenagers overall is increasing. So is any of that you can talk about or address? And I know I just gave you a whole bundle of things, but because we could talk about this for the next 2 days. Is there any of that you can address?
I think you hit on something that's pretty significant. I think it's just that art and science of connection. When we're in that place, just being able to connect with someone is such a support to making them feel heard, making them feel connected to the world around them. Those things that social media sometimes pulls us away is that connection. As much as we bring in technology to try to connect, it disconnects us more than it connects us at times. And so coming along beside someone and having that connection, just listening and hearing them, that art of talking about what's going on inside of them is a huge support in that. And actually, therapists, one of the things that we will learn in our profession is, building that rapport, building that relationship and that connection with the client across from us is actually one of the biggest factors of whether or not they're going to succeed. Because if they can't feel like they can connect and they can't feel heard in that session, they're not going to get much out of what we do. And so just that art and that science of connection is such a big piece, I think, of what we need to grow and be successful.
And there's just one other comment, and we're going to have to go at some point, but I would be really interested in knowing the difference between a suicide rate of the grieving from the loss of a loved one versus grieving from the loss of a relationship, a romantic relationship. Because I know, that those are two of the categories that we see quite a bit.
Yeah, I don't have those statistics in front of me, but I think both of those are situational that have a huge impact on our mental health. I think when we lose relationship, specifically significant relationships, it can impact our identity and impact who we believe we are and whose we are at that point sometimes. And so that can definitely shift our feeling of, will it get better? Will I ever find this again? Which can impact our mental health.
Right.
And I wish in schools they would teach some of that coping skills, conflict resolution, things like that, especially in young people, because when you learn at a very young age that these things might happen and how to handle them, maybe our kids who have grown up might handle those situations better. I did want to talk a little bit about survivors, but obviously we don't have a lot of time because I can't imagine what someone is going through when you lose a loved one in that way. But I suspect they can seek help as well through counseling services like Crosswinds as well, right?
Absolutely. And we see a need for it because there's that survivor's guilt that comes of those asking those questions. What did I miss? What were the symptoms I didn't see? What should I have done? And then almost ruminating and living in that past moment of, if I would have just done this, this wouldn't have happened. And that can be very hard to shift and get past that. And so that's definitely a time I would say, reach out and look into counseling for yourself. One of the things we do at Crosswinds is we will match you to a best fit therapist. So it's not just whoever's open, you go and see, but we try to find someone who's going to connect with you the best and work through those mental health issues that you're dealing with.
Now, do most people come to you, or are you doing it virtually, or what are the options to connect?
Yeah, we have both options available right now. We both do online and in office. And so we have, depending on the person, some want only in office, some want only online, and some kind of go both ways and go back and forth.
Okay, sounds good. Well, we appreciate you coming on COVID-19 recovery, enlightening us, educating us. And folks, the information is on the screen. If you are contemplating suicide, please call for help. If you are a survivor and you just can't get through what has happened, do give Grant a call. Grant Anderson, who is the clinical supervisor at Crosswinds Counseling here in Indianapolis. Thanks so much for joining us here.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Grant.
During the COVID-19 emergency, community action agencies are open and here to ensure the well-being of families across the country. For over 50 years, we've been delivering life-changing services, solutions, and stability.
Serving Boone, Hamilton, Hendricks, and Marion counties, be sure to visit our website to learn about employment and education opportunities, food, housing, transportation assistance, and more. Apply today by calling 317-396-1800.